Good afternoon, CPAC friends and family, for another edition of CPAC Live. Today is the afternoon of July 3rd, the eve of July 4th, America's Independence Day, as we like to call it. And because we're all conservatives and we all study history, we celebrate the real reasons behind July 4th. We know that there's a deeper meaning and not just barbecues and getting to go to the pool and all of that fun stuff, that this is actually a real celebration of what it means to be an American and our proud history, given that we're living in historic times, fortunate or unfortunate. There's a real question on the table, my fellow Americans. Is this our last July 4th? The mobs in the street insist that July 4th should be abolished. They're pulling down the statues of Francis Scott Key, of Abraham Lincoln, of Ulysses S. Grant, of saints of the Catholic Church, of Jesus. And we've got to ask ourselves, are we watching the end of America, this radical experiment in self-government, the notion that Americans are capable of governing themselves? Or are we headed toward a different future for the next generation? These are all important and occasionally scary questions, but we're going to tackle them. And we've got a great guest. Trent England joins us from the great state of Oklahoma. Trent created an organization as the executive director of Save Our States. One of the hallmarks of American democracy is this notion that we engage in peaceful transitions of power, that we hold elections every 4 years for federal office, 6 years for senators, obviously. But it's the idea that we're capable as citizens to be able to make decisions about who our leaders are. Trent, your group was specifically founded to push back on this whole idea of the popular vote versus the Electoral College. One, tell us a little bit about Save Our States. And two, are you at all concerned that elections are losing their meaning, given that a lot of folks on the American left are not interested in even accepting the results of certain elections?
No, I think that's right. I was working on election security back 15, 20 years ago, and watched the rise of this effort on the left called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact to try to basically nullify or hijack the Electoral College in favor of a direct popular vote for president without ever changing the Constitution. They're trying to do this at the state legislative level. And I created Save Our States to push back on that for that very reason, right? I mean, elections are important. How we do elections matters. And the Electoral College protects our states. It helps to protect us against election fraud when it comes to presidential elections. And if we do away with that, it's just one more step down this road of unraveling the Constitution and unraveling this unique system that we have in our American Republic. And so, Save Our States is fighting all around the country to try to stop this National Popular Vote Compact, especially right now. I should say, because I'm sure you've got folks watching in Colorado. This is going to be on the ballot in Colorado this November. So a big opportunity to stop it there.
One of the fears that we've seen put into practice over the past 3 years is a lot of folks who are part of the hashtag resistance crowd have taken the fact that Hillary won the popular vote as an attempt to delegitimize from day one, from the first Wednesday in November in 2016, to delegitimize the duly elected President Trump, obviously, and say, well, we're not going to respect him. Hashtag not my president. Tell me some of the ramifications that would happen if there weren't an electoral college. The general notion is that, good folks in Oklahoma and what folks refer to as flyover country in Kansas and Arkansas would be governed by the views of folks in California and New York on the coast. Is that your sense of it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this is something a lot of people don't realize. This is a big part of why we have the Electoral College. Because James Madison at the Constitutional Convention, as they were debating this, he said, hey, look, I like the idea of a popular vote, right? I mean, who doesn't? Just for simplicity's sake, if nothing else, right? It's easy to understand. It's easy to explain. But he said, look, the problem is if you do that, the big population centers, and the particular concern at the time was a couple of states that were so much bigger than everybody else, he said they'll control the White House forever. right? And everybody else gets locked out of that process. And the same thing is true today, only more so, right? I mean, we won't be the United States of America. We'll be the United Cities of America if national popular vote gets its way.
You mentioned to keep an eye on Colorado, and we'll be joined in our next segment by our friend and Colorado board member, former Congressman Bob Beauprez. Are there any other states that we should look at? My recollection is that there are some states that have already passed this. What's the ramifications if California has already passed a popular vote thing? What's that mean for the rest of the country and the state of elections, which are just 140 days away?
Yeah, that's right. There are 15 states plus the District of Columbia that have made this law.
Not a state.
Not a state. That's right. But they're very clever. Here's what they did when they came up with this plan, and this was a bunch of sour grapes folks after Al Gore lost, actually. So quite a while ago, they put into this plan a trigger mechanism. So California has passed this, but it has no effect in California or anywhere else until they get to 270 electoral votes. Right now, the compact has 196 electoral votes, if you include Colorado, where they may get out of it here later this year. So they're almost 75% of the way to putting it into effect, but it doesn't change anything in any of those states, and this is for political reasons, right? I mean, basically, California, New York, Illinois, the places that have passed this law said, well, we don't want to lose any of our power. We just want to hijack the system, so we'll put this trigger in there so that it only changes things if we get to a point where we actually control the whole election. The side effect of that is people say, well, Trent, why don't you go and sue and stop this? You can't sue until it takes effect. So they have basically locked us out of court unless they win a political victory. Then we could go and challenge this. And, it's a real toss-up legal issue because it's an idea. National popular vote is an idea so dumb that James Madison never really worried about state legislators giving away their power, right? So the Constitution doesn't really tell us exactly what to do there, unfortunately. No, this is a big fight going on all around the country. We narrowly stopped them in Virginia earlier this year, last year in Maine and Nevada. Just barely blocked national popular vote in those states, and they squeaked it through in New Mexico, Oregon, Delaware, purely partisan efforts in most of those states by folks on the left who they don't want candidates like Al Gore or Hillary Clinton to ever lose again.
And when you have folks like Stacey Abrams in Georgia who are able to parlay a loss into a political victory of sorts with increased visibility, it's a real question, a question of election integrity and whether we're going to respect the results. It does go back to 2000 and Bush v. Gore, where it was the Supreme Court, the Florida Supreme Court, the Florida Secretary of State. Like lots of us, you wear several different hats. You're also a fellow at the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs and have been very involved in the criminal justice reform movement. There's a state question, they call it SQ 805, that's happening, that's up for consideration there in Oklahoma. What changes would state question 805 make to the Oklahoma criminal justice system?
Yeah, so one thing that we've discovered in Oklahoma, we have some of the highest incarceration rates in the country, highest incarceration rate for women, second or third highest overall incarceration rate. And we discovered that one of the reasons for that is we have this sentencing enhancement law. Lots of states have this, right? If someone has committed a felony in the past and they commit another felony, then they can go to prison for even longer than the highest range in the crime that they committed. Lots of states have that for violent offenders, but Oklahoma also does that for people who have never committed a violent crime. State question 805 would say, look, we should put people in prison because we're afraid of them, not just because we're mad at them, right? These nonviolent offenders, many of them have mental health and drug problems, right? They don't need to go to prison for decades, right? They need to go to prison and they need to accept their punishment, but ultimately these are people who need treatment, they need reintegration into society. 805 would stop the use of this extra sentencing enhancement for people who did not commit a violent crime and didn't previously commit a violent crime. I think it's really good, common sense policy.
How did the state end up in a place with such severe sentences for such minor infractions?
Well, my read on the history, and I've only been in Oklahoma for 6 years, so this is my own sense of it. Is the Democrats were holding on to power here kind of by their fingernails for a long time, right? Oklahoma is a conservative state, and as the National Democratic Party became much more on the left, I don't even want to say liberal, right? They moved so far to the left. One of the ways that conservative Democrats in Oklahoma sort of clung to their power was saying, well, no, we're conservative. We're not like Michael Dukakis. We're tough on crime. And so they passed these laws that are just draconian. And, now you have Republicans who have taken over in the last decade in Oklahoma, and they're kind of going back through these things, trying to rectify some of these political mistakes that were made in the past.
Where can folks learn more about you, Trent England, and learn more about Save Our States? Keep an eye on State Question 805. And what can they do to support all of the good work that you and your colleagues are doing on these issues?
Yeah, thank you. The place to go for all the work on the Electoral College and to join that fight is SaveOurStates.com. Find us at SaveOurStates.com or join Save Our States on Facebook. We have a very active Facebook community. For State Question 805, Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs is a real leader on criminal justice reform in Oklahoma. The website there is OCPA Think, because we're a think tank at OCPA. So OCPAthink.org, and folks can find out what we're doing on State Question 805 and a lot of other important public policy issues in Oklahoma.
Trent, it sounds like you're doing a lot of great work. We look forward to seeing you at CPAC 2021 in February here in the Washington, D.C. area. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy day, and we're going to make sure that we stay in touch with you to update us on these important fights, especially as we get closer to November on the Electoral College issue. And, we may have to talk about the Electoral College and the popular vote again if this thing is so close, since a lot of Democrats continue to talk about it, win, lose, or draw, regardless of the will of the people. Folks, up next, our friend and board member, former Colorado Congressman Bob Beauprez is going to be joining us with Dr. Paul Kengor. So stick around for that discussion. But first, take a look at this interesting video about the roots of the Black Lives Matter organization and where their founders developed their viewpoints and their policy proposals for what we're all watching happen in America today.
Many see the slogan Black Lives Matter, or BLM, as a noble plea for equal treatment under the law. It's a cry to secure the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for everyone. But what does the Black Lives Matter organization actually stand for? To find out, look no further than their leaders, Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrisse Cullors. Here's Cullors in a revealing 2015 interview.
We actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists.
Visit the Black Lives Matter website and read the list of demands to get a sense of how deep a transformation they seek. One of those demands proclaims, quote, "We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another. We can't be certain, but it's hard to believe this radical agenda is what most signed up for when they made that hashtag Black Lives Matter social media post, or that every employee, customer, or shareholder at Nike endorses a disruption of the family." Garza first coined the phrase in 2013, the day George Zimmerman was acquitted of murdering Trayvon Martin. Her friend Cullors added the hashtag and joined the words so it could travel through social media. Tometi created the digital platform BlackLivesMatter.com. According to Robert Stilson of the Capital Research Center, the group became a self-styled global network in 2014 and a fiscally sponsored project of a separate progressive nonprofit in 2016. This evolution has helped embolden an agenda vastly more ambitious than a national defunding of police. The goals of the Black Lives Matter organization go far beyond what most people think. They're hiding in plain sight, there for the world to see. If only we read beyond the slogans and the summaries of the movement they helped to create. It's a distinction with a profound difference. Their radical Marxist agenda is bent on supplanting the basic building blocks of society, the family, replacing it with the state, and destroying the economic system that has lifted more people from poverty than any other. Theirs is a blueprint for misery, not justice. It must be rejected.
Well, hello everyone, and what a privilege it is to be with you. I'm Bob Beauprez. I'm a member of the board of the American Conservative Union, actually the treasurer of the organization, and it is my privilege this morning to be interviewing Dr. Paul Kengor. Dr. Kengor, you can't know how much I have been looking forward to this. I consider this one of the great opportunities of my whole life. I admire your work so much. Dr. Kengor, for those of you,
you're too nice. As my friend Bill Clark would say, my late friend Bill Clark, you're easily deceived.
Well, I believe it's very well-deserved praise. Dr. Kengor, those of you who may not know, is a political science professor at Grove City College in Pennsylvania. He's also the chief academic fellow at the Institute for Faith and Freedom at Grove City. He is a best-selling author. I think he's published about 11 books already and more on the way, as we'll talk about before this is over. He's a very familiar commentator on radio, TV, all kinds of print media, has been a regular columnist at the American Spectator, and is a friend of ACU and CPAC. I think you said you've been to about 20 CPACs?
I have. Yeah, I've been going there since the late 1990s, and I can't think of a year that I've missed. In fact, so it's probably been over 20 years. So that would be, if I'm doing my math correctly, that's twice the number of CPACs that even Ronald Reagan did.
That's correct. That's correct. Well, the main reason you're here this morning, to stay on the theme of Reagan, is that Dr. Kengor is also widely recognized as an international authority, not only on Ronald Reagan, but on St. John Paul II, on communism, and on the Cold War. So specifically this morning, I want to talk about your exceptional book, A Pope and a President, John Paul II, Ronald Reagan, and the Extraordinary Untold Story of the 20th Century. Dr. Kengor, I just finished listening to the audio version, so thank you for making it available on audio. That's how I get most of my books done.
Wow. Now, I haven't heard it on audio. So
it's exceptional. It's exceptional. Very well performed and most enjoyable. But I just found the whole thing fascinating. To stay on your subtitle for just a second with my first question, what is that extraordinary untold story of the 20th century that you reveal in your book?
Well, I guess the book is about 600 pages. It's hard to sum it up, but if I had to pick two dates, I would pick March 30th, 1981 and May 13th, 1981. And on those two dates, Ronald Reagan first. Ronald Reagan was shot outside the Washington Hilton by John Hinckley. And then about 6 weeks later, May 13th, 1981, John Paul II was shot in St. Peter's Square, smack in the middle of St. Peter's Square by Mahmoud Ali Asha. And these two men, probably, Bob, they both probably should have bled to death. They both required very heavy blood transfusions. If the bullet in each case had been just a few centimeters over, in Reagan's case, nearer to his heart, in the case of John Paul II, nearer to the main abdominal artery, they almost certainly would have both bled to death on the way to the hospital. And the fact that they both survived, they considered miraculous. They considered it divine intervention. And they got together at the Vatican in June 1982, about a year later. And these two had been trying to get together since Reagan was first inaugurated in January 1981. In fact, Reagan wanted to get together with John Paul II when he was in his house in California with Dick Allen, an old friend of CPAC, by the way. And the June 1979, watching footage of John Paul II's return to Poland, what Newt Gingrich called 9 days that changed the world. And Reagan said at that moment to Dick Allen, he said, Dick, that's it. The Pope is the key, the Pope is the key, the Pope is the key. We've got to find a way to get elected, and we got to reach out to this new Pope in the Vatican and make them an ally. So there they were in June 1982. They finally got together. And Reagan, I mean, imagine, Bob, you have this non-Catholic, non-Polish president, right, saying to this Polish Pope, he says, hope remains in Poland, in your country, and we working together can keep it alive. And they both confided in one another that they believed that God had spared their lives for a special purpose, which was to take down and defeat atheistic Soviet communism. So from there on, they spent the 1980s, and in particular, a team of Pio Laghi, the Apostolic Nuncio to Washington from the Vatican, later Cardinal Pio Laghi, Bill Casey, the CIA, Bill Clark at the National Security Council. Those were kind of the three, that was the troika, if you will, the main conduit between the Vatican and the White House. They spent the next several years working together as closely as they could. And as Clark used to tell me, I became Bill Clark's biographer. Clark used to tell me, two teams, working toward a common goal, and a sort of a confluence of events, doing whatever they could, wherever they could, to try to work together to this common purpose of defeating atheistic Soviet communism.
Let's stay on that point for just a second, because it's another one I think you make so profoundly well in the book. The point being that Reagan, you referred to him as a visionary in the book, not just a guy who as most in those times. I mean, I was around in those critical years of the 80s too, and paying attention, and I certainly was a fan of Reagan and certainly our Pope. I'm Catholic as you are, and so he was my Pope too. But most people, most of the experts of the day, the diplomats of the day, were into détente and appeasement and accommodation. Ronald Reagan was the one who, when he was asked, how does this Cold War end? He says, we win, they lose. And a lot of people thought he was crazy. How can you say something like that? He was always cautioned in his speeches by his own speechwriters to tone it down a little. We don't want to offend anybody. But Reagan was the one who said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. What was it about Reagan, especially Reagan, that caused you to call him a visionary? Why was he so unusual? And why did he become this giant, he and John Paul II, probably the two giants of the 20th century?
Well, I'll give you a couple of other dates. So it was January 1977, and Dick Allen really figures in this. He became Reagan's first national security advisor before Bill Clark. And Dick flew out to California to meet with Reagan. It was right after Jimmy Carter was inaugurated. This was January 1977. And in fact, Allen went out to meet with Reagan to get his endorsement. Allen was going to run for governor of New Jersey. And Reagan said, they started talking about foreign policy, and he looked Dick Allen in the face. He said, Dick, my policy, my idea toward the Soviet Union is very simple. Soviet Union in the Cold War. We win and they lose. What do you think about that? And Allen, who had worked for Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon and the détente folks, said that he was so struck by this confidence, right, this certainty, that he dropped his gubernatorial bid in New Jersey, and decided to join Reagan's crusade against Soviet communism. And it was Allen again and Peter Hannaford as well, who was also an old friend of CPAC. They and Reagan, along with their wives, Nancy was there, they went to the Berlin Wall. in October 1978, and no cameras, no one was there to witness it. And Reagan stood and looked at the Berlin Wall, and he said, "We've got to find a way to knock this thing down." Now imagine that. In fact, I quote in the book Jimmy Carter completely accepting the Berlin Wall. Well, yeah, it's just the way it is. It's going to be there. And for Reagan, it's one thing to say, "Dick, we win, they lose. We got to find a way to knock this thing down." But almost at the exact same time that Reagan said that, the conclave gets together in Rome. And for the first time in 455 years, they pick a non-Italian pope and they pluck him straight out of the middle of Poland, the heart of the communist bloc. And with that, Reagan, who wasn't Catholic, but whose father was, brother was, had a lot of close Catholic friends, he said, "That's it. I mean, it's easy to say we win, they lose, but how do you do it?" Well, for one thing, to suddenly have a stridently anti-communist Polish pope, this was a game changer, right? This was a way to get to we win and they lose. Now, after that, you needed a lot more. Among other things, you needed to win the presidency, which is not easy. But Reagan made it look easy. He won 44 out of 50 states against an incumbent in 1980. But the idea, you're right, Bob. I mean, people thought we need to manage this Cold War. It's not going to end. We're not going to win. We need to learn how to get along. We need trade and treaties. Reagan said, no, we can win. And by the way, the left had this all wrong. We don't win by nuking the Soviet Union, right? We win by this multi-layered assault of economic warfare, public diplomacy, all sorts of other things. My book, The Crusader, Ronald Reagan and the Fall of Communism, is all about this. It goes through all of that. That's how we take them down peacefully. We don't blow them to smithereens. He didn't want nuclear war. And that's where Reagan dedicated the entirety of his two-term presidency to accomplishing that purpose.
We're about out of time, and I hate to rush this, but one of the revelations in your book that I found very profound, we knew that these two men had a lot of respect for each other. They're both credited for ending the Cold War, fighting communism, bringing it to its knees. But I didn't fully understand the personal bond. You point out that Ronald Reagan actually referred to the Pope as my best friend. That's quite a statement for Ronald Reagan, who had a lot of friends, a lot of admirers, a lot of famous people that he rubbed elbows with. But he called the Pope my best friend. And in the next 20 or 30 seconds is about all we've got left. Expound on that and why that was so telling.
I was amazed by that. I asked Nancy Reagan about it a bunch of times. In fact, when I went back through my notes for the book, I think I must have asked her by email probably a half a dozen times. But I think what it meant, Bob, is that they weren't best friends in the sense of, calling each other up, go fishing together, go to the ball game, the Pope asking about Reagan's grandkids. But Reagan meant that in this battle of the 20th century against atheistic Soviet communism which had killed over 100 million people in the 20th century, double the combined death tolls of World War I and World War II, he had no better friend in that battle to defeat Soviet communism than John Paul II. Now, there was an affection there as well, and a real ideological kinship and even spiritual kinship. But I think what he meant that when it came to defeating the Soviet Empire, really his best friend, and by the way, kudos to Margaret Thatcher too, no question about that. But he had really no better ally, no more significant ally in the global stage than Pope John Paul II.
Paul, I wish we had time to go into the connection with the importance of Fatima in this whole story, the Fatima apparitions. I'd love to pursue with you the personality, the inside view of Mikhail Gorbachev.
Yes.
I had the thrill of meeting both Gorbachev and Thatcher sitting shoulder to shoulder at the Reagan funeral in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And what a photo that was. For all of the 20th century. But we're out of time. I want to thank you for being part of CPAC Live and a loyal CPAC supporter and a critical part of it over all these years. Tell us very quickly, you've got another book coming out, I think in the near future. Tell us about it, and then we'll have to cut this off.
Well, thanks. And if you want to do this again, I'd be happy to do a sequel, a longer sequel. But I have a book coming out called The Devil and Karl Marx.
I look forward to that.
And this really looks very seriously. It's 500 pages. It's got 700 some footnotes, a very serious look at what Marx thought and wrote about religion and of the Marxist assault on religion. And it goes through the Catholic Church and its encyclicals. It goes through communist attempts at infiltration, especially of the mainline denominations, Bob, Presbyterian Church, United Methodist Church, the Episcopal Church. So it's an incendiary title, right? A clever title, obviously a play on books that I did like God and Ronald Reagan and God and George W. Bush. It's a very serious look, and I think people as they read it will be shocked at the assault was even worse than people realize. I really think you can call it nothing but diabolical. It was really a spiritual battle as much as an ideological and political one.
When will it be available, Paul?
So it'll be out August 18th. And
awesome.
Yeah,
So,
if you go to Amazon right now, type in The Devil and Karl Marx, you can pre-order it.
Paul, thank you very much. I can't thank you enough, and I look forward to the next time we can visit more about your intriguing work. What a great life's work you have had.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you very much. God
God
bless.
bless you. God bless you.
Thank
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day. Well, hey, Ian, that was fun. Dr. Kengor, I could talk to him for hours and hours. So thanks for putting it together, and thanks for letting me be part of it.
I could listen to you guys for hours and hours. I hope that we can get the two of you back on a later edition. Let me ask you, Bob, it's July 4th weekend. How are you going to be celebrating the holiday?
Well, a little quieter than normal out here in Colorado. We are going to have two of our kids over in their immediate families, but it's kind of stay-at-home time and waving the flag, which we'll definitely be doing, but a much quieter celebration than we typically have.
Well, I want to encourage all of our CPAC friends and family to put that flag out. And if you're a veteran, salute it. We're in a weird moment in American history where, I don't know if you saw earlier this week, a soccer player stood for the national anthem and had to put out a press release to excuse her behavior. But at least in my house, and I know in your house, Bob, you stand for the flag, you stand for the national anthem. And I want to remind as absurd as this is, remind all of our CPAC friends and family that it's okay to do that, even in 21st century America. Matt Schlapp is going to be back in the captain's seat here at the anchor desk on Monday, July 6th. You can always watch at live.conservative.org. You can follow us on Facebook and watch there. Watch on Periscope and Twitter and Parler. He's going to be joined by Georgia Representative Barry Loudermilk. Bob, it gives me great pride to think of you as somebody that I think of as a foxhole friend, and that's what we try to develop here with all of our CPAC Live audience members, is this notion that we, as Reagan said, stand shoulder to shoulder in the thickest of the fight. Bob, a happy July 4th weekend to you, sir.
Same to you, my friend. God bless you.
And we look forward to seeing the rest of you on Monday, July 6th, when Matt Schlapp returns to the captain's chair for another edition of CPAC Live.